Hello, and welcome to Pop Culture Poppin'. I'm your host, Alexa, and this is going to be a podcast where I talk about pretty much everything from the business aspect to the industry to different pop culture moments, and I'm going to be having different guests pop in and out of the podcast. And today, my first guest is actually my husband.
Hello, my name is Brian. It's a honor to be in this podcast.
And what do you think qualifies you to talk about pop culture?
Oh, absolutely nothing. I'm not qualified by any means.
I mean, Brian did go to school for kinesiology and he wants to work in the medical field. But you do have at least some basis, maybe even a little bit more than me, if you want to go into that.
It's this weird, complex, algorithmic that I feel like I've gotten all the knowledge and obsessed with movies, film, TV, you name it.
Film scores, especially.
Yeah, and essentially I feel like I've gone to film school and don't have any license of bachelor's to that title.
It's just your life. It's just your hobby. And you happen to have a sister who works in the film industry now, so that's been correct. Really cool. So it's kind of within your family, kind of a foundation of something that you all enjoy.
I mean, I definitely, if I can look back at where it all started, it definitely started with my parents, and definitely started with them taking us to Universal Studios and being able to experience all these movie adapted rides into something more realistic, aka being able to experience these rides in person.
Yeah.
Back then you had the E.T. ride where the mummy is now. You had the Back to the Future ride. All these would be groundbreaking classic films back in their time. What grasped my sister and I's attention into learning more about what, film and TV is about.
Yeah. I'll definitely have to bring you back and talk about something Universal related. But today we're actually talking about something technically Disney related. We are kind of going to be discussing all things Marvel, but more specifically the new Spider-Man film coming out, No Way Home.
That is not Disney. That is half Disney, half Sony.
Okay, well, we're talking about, I said Marvel, and then more specifically the new Spider-Man film. Yeah. So technically still partially a part of Disney. So the date that we're filming this is, what's the date today?
It's November 19th.
November 19th, and the trailer just came out on November, which day was it? The new trailer.
It was on Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, it was the fact that you have, websites such as Collider offering free tickets and emailing you that, apply and, just be able to experience a movie trailer it's kind of unheard of. So, it's a pretty big deal when you have events, not only it's not even to the movie, to the trailer.
Just the trailer.
So that just kind of gives you a glimpse of how huge this movie's going to be. And I've already told you my about it, but I really believe that this is going to be one of the most high-grossing, financially successful films behind Endgame.
So a little bit of background on Brian and I's knowledge of Marvel today as we talk about this. Brian has been invested since the beginning. He's been there since the first Iron Man came out. When you were, how old were you when that happened? Elementary school still, right?
Definitely elementary school. I mean, I didn't even understand what they were saying because the vocabulary.
Yeah, it wasn't big. The build-up wasn't there yet.
But I just remember seeing Iron Man on the screen. I'm like, first of all, who is this character? Because it's not Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because you had Fantastic Four, you had X-Men, you had
it was
Blade,
a whole new
Hulk.
concept for you.
So the fact that Iron Man was something you only see in cartoons and then you see it live action, you're like, this feels kind of wrong. But little did I know it was the beginning of something that would be just impactful.
Literally, like, culture changing eventually as time went on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a global thing now.
Yeah.
I mean, you go anywhere, you're like, oh my gosh, Do you walk around and see celebrities all the time? You're like, no, because I don't live in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But it's a cultural and global thing, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. So you definitely are well-versed within the MCU.
Definitely not licensed or certified, but I would say have a...
Very knowledgeable. You have, information as far as what the comics are like. You have watched all of the movies. I, on the other hand, am kind of a disgrace when it comes to being a new MCU fan.
I mean, we all have to start somewhere, but being a disgrace that you are my wife and you haven't seen these.
Well, no, now I have.
Yeah.
So I kind of just saw bits and pieces of different films, unfortunately. I didn't get to watch them in order when they came out. I kind of sporadically saw a film here or there. And I had always wanted to watch them all the way through, but I knew it was going to be a process. And Brian finally gave me that opportunity and was actually willing to sit through and have that process with me of watching all of the films, literally just earlier this year. So...
I mean, it's something like... that process of being able to watch over 20 MCU movies, it's...
And we did it in about the span of a month, which was overwhelming. It was a lot to take in. 10 plus years worth of content all in the span of a month was definitely an emotional roller coaster for me.
I mean, something that I've always waited within a little over 10 years, you had to experience it in a month, and that is...
A little upsetting?
It's not a little upsetting. It's a lot of hard work, but you don't get that same nostalgia as, waiting, seeing for the trailers, hearing the rumors, looking at the set pictures, hearing all the, fan theories that are coming out.
I think this new Spider-Man film coming out is my first experience with that, kind of getting to see the process from the beginning, having more of a base of understanding and hearing different people come up with their theories, like you said, kind of getting to watch the posters come out, the trailers come out, and you being as excited as you are has really allowed me to kind of partake in more of this nostalgic type experience this time around.
Yeah, I think you're definitely getting the first taste of what MCU fans have experienced, like I said, over 10 years, and it's just the reality of how MCU, this phase 4 they're going through is gonna be like, and it's been exciting to see you witness and experience this, but like I said, I've been in this bandwagon before, so it's nothing new. But it's very exciting and very nerve-wracking because you don't know what's coming. But you have theories, you have, guesses, debates, whatever, etc. of what, not only the next Spider-Man was going to be like, but the whole universe for Spider-Man and for the MCU.
So right now, I kind of want to give you the opportunity to put down on record what your theories are. I kind of want you to walk me through what you're excited for, what you think this film is going to be. So you have it down, obviously, when the film does come out, you'll be able to look back and be like, oh, I did call that, or you didn't call it. Yeah. So just kind of baseline in the beginning, what do you think this film is going to entail?
I think in order for me to answer that question, we need to start and look back at, when Spider-Man was introduced to the MCU. From the get-go, I realized when Disney got a hold of the character that it was going to be something different that Sony has never done before. And that was a hard pill to swallow because we're so used to having this kind of theme of having a more serious, dark looking, almost Christopher Nolan-like films. Mm-hmm. An adaptation of Spider-Man, like Tobey Maguire's, or Andrew Garfield's. Those Spider-Mans were more realistic. Obviously, they were being played by an older actor. But the casting of Tom Holland as Spider-Man, I knew they were going to do something different because that was the first character to be around the same age as Peter Parker is in the comic books. So
you're saying that you could definitely tell that by the time Disney had more of the rights and that Tom Holland was cast, could you tell that it was going to be a little bit more of like a lighter, kind of happier version of Spider-Man that wasn't really shown before?
Yeah. There's been other films, like Logan, where it centers around a younger kid movie, but it's very graphic, the story is meant for an older audience.
Yeah.
But when you have Tom Holland, who's a high schooler, who plays a high schooler, and is centered most closely adapted to the comic books, it's going to pull in a younger audience.
Yeah, a much younger audience.
That's what Disney was also trying to do, is kind of have it be an Incredibles-like adaptation.
I never thought of it like that. It's very reminiscent of that.
Yeah, which, it's different, but also it just doesn't follow the trajectory as Sam Raimi's or Mark Webb's Spider-Man adaptations.
Mm-hmm.
With that to say, I knew that with Tom Holland, there was going to be different takes of the Spider-Man. So when Homecoming was announced, I had a feeling that one of them was going to know who Spider-Man's identity was, and I had a feeling it was going to be Aunt May,
mm-hmm.
which that's something the previous films have never, ever done. So keeping that in mind that, Disney's going to do something different, I had that just gut feeling. I'm like, all right, they're going to do something different, and this is what their different is going to be like. They're going to have Aunt May know that he's Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
The last 2 seconds of the film, you realize that Aunt May finds out that he's Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, that's called for. And I think that, I don't know, to me, there's some things that are so obvious, but sometimes there's like, no, well, maybe it's not going to be that. So with this new Spider-Man coming out, it's definitely opening up the door and having it feel like the old Spider-Mans. Like, this is definitely a movie that's not centered towards to a younger audience. This feels like an actual Spider-Man film for once.
Yeah, because I know, so for anybody who's listening, Spider-Man is Brian's favorite superhero across all platforms, and I have definitely heard his takes on both the previous Spider-Man, and I've heard his take on Tom Holland being the most recent Spider-Man, and I think one of the biggest things that you, like, kind of reiterating what you were saying, that you struggled with, is that you were so used to the previous Spider-Man movie being more geared towards a teenage or young adult audience, as opposed to Tom Holland being geared, including, not necessarily specifically geared towards, but definitely including children.
Right.
So now you feel like this new film coming out will kind of encapsulate everything in a way that the other two didn't.
I feel like they've been building up and sequencing the films as kind of, this character development of being young, reckless, and just wanting what he wants, to finally, having a true character development, not only within a movie, but within a series.
Mm-hmm.
And some trilogies do that really well, and some movies don't. But I think this has been not only just a character development, but just a whole theme for it. Just looks like a whole different adaptation of Spider-Man. That's a whole different adaptation Spider within Disney, but very similar to, like I said, the Sam Raimi and the Mark Webb ones.
Okay, so now I kind of want to focus on the characters. Would you like to discuss the villains that they've already introduced within the trailers that we know for sure are going to be in the film?
Yeah, so, you're pulling all the villains, mostly all the villains, from the Tobey Maguire films and the Andrew Garfield films. And just so you know, I'm going back and forth from saying Tobey or Sam Raimi films or Andrew Garfield and Mark Webb, because I got to give some recognition to the directors.
Yeah,
as
pay
well.
respects where they are due.
Yeah, but so this new film, we're being introduced again to the one and only villain, Dr. Octopus, which is played by Alfred Molina.
Is he your favorite? Is he kind of the king of the Spider-Man villains for you?
Just seeing him in the comic books and the cartoons, and now in the new Spider-Man PlayStation game, it's definitely such an iconic character to be able to see back on the big screen.
And I love that they reused the actor and that they stayed true to the character, because I feel like they'd be a lot of very angry fans if they had recasted.
Yeah, that's a well said point, because that was one of the hardest things that the Amazing Spider-Man 2 kind of did, was rebrand the Green Goblin with Harry Osborn.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't the Harry Osborn. It wasn't James Franco's Harry Osborn. It was a whole different take of the Green Goblin, and it didn't satisfy fans. But yeah, so with that said, we have Doc Ock again. We have William Dafoe as the Green Goblin again,
which I love. William Dafoe is incredible. I think he's gonna knock it out of the park, as he always does.
Yeah. And then we, of course, have the Sandman from Spider-Man 3, who's played by Thomas Hayden Church. It's unfortunate we don't see Topher Grace's Venom, but I think that's going to be the biggest surprise, because I don't know, I have a feeling that we'll see Tom Hardy's Venom in this film. As you can see from the end of the trailer, that Doctor Strange definitely has concerns of other people coming in at the last battle scene. From the Amazing Spider-Man movies, we'll have Electro and the Lizard being casted again by the same original actors, Jamie Foxx and Rhys Ifans, I believe.
And I would just like to say, as somebody who is going to school for acting, I really got to give props to Jamie Foxx, because I don't dislike Jamie Foxx, but I severely dislike Electro, which means he's doing a phenomenal job making me uncomfortable as a villain. I had such a hard time watching the film that he was in, and just sitting with, he's definitely one of the most unnerving villains I think I've seen from any of the superhero films, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what they're gonna do with his character as they bring him back, since he's as vengeful as he is, especially.
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you look at all these characters, all these villains, they all know who Spider-Man is, and that is Peter Parker. Electro's the only one who does not know who Spider-Man identity is.
Oh, I never even realized that.
He just knows he has this vengeful hate for Spider-Man himself. So I'm curious to see what they're going to do to his character in this new upcoming Spider-Man movie, as he finds out that it's Peter Parker. Because he has no association to Peter Parker at all. I mean, it's not like he's met Peter Parker. If you look at the Amazing Spider-Man 2, he's only met Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So I think I'm curious what that's gonna, lead to in this upcoming film.
And the question that obviously everybody has on their minds as they're going in to watch this film: do you think that there are going to be other Spider-Men in this movie, or do you think we're only going to see Tom Holland?
Like I said, Disney from the first movie, Homecoming, Disney has been doing things to make everything so different. Like I said, from having Aunt May find out that he's Spider-Man in the first film, to having I had a feeling they were going to have the second Spider-Man film, Far From Home, not take place in New York, and they just changed the whole setting and having it a European movie, and now that they're having this third film, it's kind of a no-brainer that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield are going to be in this movie.
So you're staking your claim. You think that they're in there? Claim.
Yeah, I'm putting... And it's hard because now this is public, so if I'm wrong, then I'm going to look really bad.
If you're wrong, you'll be wrong with a lot of people, because everybody wants to see them in this film.
Right. I mean, it's Disney. So Disney's going to do something to make themselves more successful.
As they do. That does make sense.
So if you're bringing all the villains from the previous films, you already have an audience drawn to this film. Whether you don't like Tobey Maguire, or you don't like Andrew Garfield, or whether you don't like Tom Holland, you're rooting for one specific Spider-Man out of three.
I honestly think, like, business-wise and financially, that if they're able to pull this off, and if they do have all 3 generations of Spider-Man in this film, I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be one of the highest grossing films because, like you said, it's literally going to draw in every Spider-Man audience regardless of what their opinions are.
Right.
And I know that, like, depending on the actors and the contracts and rights and everything, it could be complicated. But if they really were able to pull through with this, I think it was going to be one of the smartest ideas.
Yeah.
One of the most lucrative ideas. Like,
I think that's something that we need to keep in mind is that when the announcement of Spider-Man being in the MCU, you realize that the impossible was possible.
Mm-hmm. All right. And besides the 2 other generations of Peter Parker Spider-Man, we do also have Miles Morales now. And I think one really important thing to note would be that his uncle was already introduced within the MCU. And one thing that I noticed when we went to Disneyland is that at Avengers Campus in California Adventure, there is a spot on Spider-Man's meet and greet wall where there's a little Miles was here, quote unquote, spray painted on the wall.
Yeah.
So do you think that they are setting up to introduce him in this film as well? Or do you think that'll be a whole separate entry into the MCU at a different point in time?
There's so much going on in this film that as much as, a lot of people have high expectations, I think there are going to be some disappointments.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't see them having or bringing the whole character in. But I feel like there's going to be definitely Easter eggs of Miles Morales. I think there's just this whole build-up of, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. So I just think that's going to be the biggest treat for the fans, is that there's going to be these 2 additional Spider-Mans.
But what if there's, like, legitimately speaking, so let's say even though all the hype is there's good enough theories. I definitely think that people have kind of gotten it down that there are very plausible reasons as to why Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield would be in this film. But let's just say that really wasn't Disney's intent, and maybe they really are just introducing Miles Morales, or maybe even I've heard the joke theory, like, oh, it's just going to be multiple Tom Hollands from different universes. Like, how much of a setback or how upset do you think the fans are going to be if that's really what happens and it's not the previous Spider-Man coming into this film?
I mean, so there's definitely going to be some disappointment, I feel like, regardless of what side of your expectations you lean towards. I really think, like I said, they are going to bring Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire. It just makes sense if they're bringing their villains into this film. But like I said, Disney's been doing something different since Homecoming. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's different Tom Hollands coming into this universe, which would be upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, because you're building up this whole piece of the puzzle, and then just having that one piece missing.
Yeah, because it's
like
definitely,
you can see the picture, but you're like, this just doesn't feel right.
Because it's literally the introduction of the multiverse within the MCU for Spider-Man, and like you said, not only are the original villains there, but they're original actors as well. So it's perfectly lining up for them to be introduced.
Right.
But like I said before, I know that maybe contracts would be difficult, maybe agreements would be difficult.
But see, that's why I made that comment of, when Spider-Man was introduced to Disney into the MCU, the impossible seemed now so possible.
So now you think, like, because that was already achieved, bringing in the other Spider-Man wouldn't necessarily be as difficult in comparison.
When you have so much money and you're Disney, and the fact that you can be and say that you went and worked for Disney, it's a no-brainer. They wouldn't be hyping and keeping this movie so secretive just to bring 2 other Tom Hollands.
I definitely think that would be very anticlimactic.
If they did that, fine, let it be. But Disney's smart, and on their side that they're gonna probably rebuttal it with something else, whether it's like we were talking about, the introduction of Miles Morales being at the end of this movie and having his story arc now in the MCU.
Oh, I could definitely see him being introduced at the very end, like one of those kind of moves where whether he's in an end credit scene or he comes in at the very end, like while it's still, part of the film.
Exactly. I mean, sorry for spoilers, but at the end of Venom 2, you do see Tom Holland, different studios now meshing it into one. So you can see the possibility of having Tom Holland reappear throughout the MCU, but not having his own standalone films, but having Tom Holland's character also reappear, or just appear in Sony's movies now.
Yeah.
As Sony's, and movies are now called Sony's Spider-Man universe.
Yeah. I definitely think that Tom Holland kind of got the Spider-Man role of a lifetime. I think, with the opportunities he's been given now, I think he definitely got the opportunities that any other Spider-Man would have loved to play.
Yeah.
So I think it would be really cool for them to be able to also bring the other Spider-Man in as a form of like honoring them for kind of, being the first ones and for kind of laying that work for becoming fan favorites on the screen.
Right. And I think that's going to be what's going to be the most satisfying thing if Disney does pull this off. None of the previous films ever had their ending movie. So this would be such a end of a chapter, not only for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but for Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, as they were set up to have a fourth Spider-Man or a third The Amazing Spider-Man and then open up a whole universe. And the fact that they're making this possible to bring, hopefully, these two other additional Spider-Mans, it's just going to, like we were talking about, it's going to bring a whole different group of audience to see what would be probably a few minutes of their favorite Spider-Mans, whether it was Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland, up in the screen all together and having that closure for once.
I think that was so beautifully said and the perfect wrap-up. Thank you so much for being on Pop Culture Poppin' with me.
Thank you for having me. It's, I'm always here to talk about all these things.
I'll definitely have you back because I know that there are a lot of films that you would love to talk about. I mean, another one of your favorites is Jurassic Park, so hopefully that'll be a future podcast episode.
Yeah, hopefully it's soon.
So if you enjoyed listening, please tune back in again when I have another episode. But for now, thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Pop Culture Poppin'. Have a good day.